who is an accountability pod accountable to? I'm Kathy Rutchley from theintimacydojo.com, here with Victor Salmon from victorsalmon.com. Who are they? Like, who are these people that are being the accountability pod and deciding things, and who do they...
That's a great question, Kathy. I guess you could say I take a three-pronged approach to accountability. So when I look at stakeholders that leadership accountability pods are accountable to, I think about the person who is reporting, the person who has essentially been reported, so the leader in question, and the community itself. Because I think the whole reason that we have a system that cares is partly because of the divisiveness we've seen in communities. When we have these small niche communities that are marginalized and don't have access to the police, either because people of color are involved, or because we're doing kink, or because it was a sex party, whatever it is, and people have jobs in corporate images, etc. No matter what marginalized community we're talking about, if you don't have access to the police, how do you move forward? How do you show someone that they've transgressed or they've made a mistake? And how do you make sure that they're taking it seriously and actually improving themselves? And I think that three-pronged approach is a really good way to do that, by having dedicated members of the pod that look after each stakeholder so they can do each role justice. So you have a liaison, which is the person who looks after the reporter, the one who's saying harm was done to me. You have the coach, who works with the leader in question to continue personal growth throughout the initial process, which I'm currently looking at a 3-month and a 1 year. I haven't fully settled yet. And of course, there's ongoing learning that a coach would sort of work with the leader on.
So you're saying when you say 3 months versus 1 year, is that meaning the coach would work with you for that long if someone reported something?
Typically, the coach is seen as a lifelong role that goes in terms. So you would hopefully have a coach that works with you for most of your life. That doesn't necessarily mean...
It's the same coach.
It doesn't mean they're putting in a set number of hours per week. It means they're a person you can check in with to be candid with and say, hey, I got these emails. I think this person thinks I'm a complete asshole. What am I missing here?
Yeah.
And that coach will be able to give you an objective opinion. Or the coach will have a duty to the accountability pod where they have to check in with you every month to see how things are going and get an assessment of your interactions. Or maybe it was a really serious transgression and they're checking in with your partners, and they're checking in with your partners every month or so, or every couple of weeks, asking them if they've seen certain harmful behaviors, or if anything has been suspect, or if they... those sorts of roles. So we're talking about leader-focused roles or leader-facing roles when you're dealing with a coach, and we're talking about reporter-facing roles when you're dealing with a liaison, which leaves, of course, the community, which is the whole reason everyone is concerned about this, because as much as I wish I could say that this is about the reporter and the people that have seen harm, my cynical experience with communities is a lot of the time people care for the first month to 3 months, and then they ultimately just want their play space back.
Yeah.
They're really emotionally exhausted, and because they have the privilege of not having to live with it for the rest of their lives, they say, oh, this was a really horrible thing that happened, and let's move on with our lives.
Yeah.
And I think if you don't have an immediate intervention for that 1 to 3 month period, you are missing that extremely important opportunity to really do some good, to really see change in the coach, to really help the reporter feel listened to, heard, and acknowledged. So bringing it all back to that role, that's the coordinator role. That is the person that makes sure the people on the pod are staying mentally okay, that they're healthy, that they're doing their self-care, that they have access to resources, that they take a break when they need to take a break, or if they have a lot of bias and the person is like, geez, 2 out of 3 of these people are my partners because they're non-monogamous like I am, and they love being that unicorn that goes around and does all the things, then yeah, you might find yourself in a situation where you're on an accountability pod and 2 of the 3 people are your partners, and you're like, there is so much bias.
This is not okay.
And in those instances, it's totally acceptable to excuse yourself from those responsibilities and say, we just need to find an emergency person because I just can't be in this role.
Right, yeah.
So the coordinator looks after the pod and also the community at large.
Yeah, I love how you broke that up, because I think when I run a lab in a corporation, and if there's not some definition of who does what, sometimes things fall through the cracks or get done too much. There's not always clarity. And I'm sure there's some pods that can arrange it really well, but I like the definition that way. How does the coordinator work with the community? Because I know that it's very important to, especially repeating harm. Like, how do we keep that aware and the community aware of the issue and moving forward, when also they might be hearing something from 5 or 6 different groups. And I know I have to turn off Facebook some days. I'm just like, I really care about these people, and I'm just like
do not have the resources today to deal with this explosion still.
Yeah.
And my genuine compassion and empathy for those humans that have it inescapably, whether they're immediately related to those people or those people themselves. A lot of people are quick to blame and point fingers, and my experience is, even if you're the person who stubbed your toe, it still hurts.
Yes, it does.
And if you stubbed your toe on someone's cane and they got seriously injured,
mm-hmm.
yes, they're seriously injured, and the fact that you're suffering isn't comparable. It's not something you'd ever compare, mm-hmm. but you're still suffering. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to try and retain as much of our humanity as possible while still centering survivors, especially in sexual assault cases, but also just centering reporters as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, it takes courage to stand up and say, hey, this isn't right. Like, I really respect when someone comes forward to me and says, hey, I don't think you're doing this right. I don't always have to agree with them. Like, I've had people say, like, things that I just didn't know how to even feasibly do. Like, we should have play parties where there's a whole separate room for people to not be sexual. And I'm like, my space isn't set up that way. We have an area that's designated, but I don't have a separate room for it. Or something like that. But I'm just the fact that they're willing to speak up, and it starts me thinking about what possibilities there are. And I really admire the courage that they come forward, like, to say, hey, this may not be right. Not everybody takes things well, and it does take courage.
Totally.
Yeah. So, is there anything you could recommend for when you're choosing people, if you were choosing people that are choosing a pod, like,
right.
Obviously a coach should be someone, you said it's either a therapist or someone that's experienced with that conflict resolution. I thought that was a great definition.
Ideally. I kind of look at it as my personal board of directors.
Yeah.
The person I chose, Ms. Blaze, for my coordinator, has done like director level roles before, and is currently sitting as the CEO on the board of directors for Metro Vancouver Kink, on which I'm also a director. So I've picked people that are intimately enmeshed in my communities. So Kale Gossen, who runs ConvergeCon, is actually the person who's my coach currently.
Nice. She's amazing.
She's a sincerely amazing human. Her compassion and ability to understand that even people who cause harm are still people is really essential to her role as a coach. And because her primary concern is that angle or that aspect of the accountability pod, picking someone who can hear things that maybe I've done at some future date, and relay that to me in a way where I can grow from that. It doesn't even matter how Kale chooses to package that information for me, because ultimately the focus should be on making me a less harmful human. Mm-hmm. Whether it's directly addressing the problem that is desired to be addressed at that moment, or whether she is opportunistically helping me get the most growth possible out of the situation, it comes back to the coach's judgment. And the coach is then accountable to the accountability pod, which acts as that bridge between all the stakeholders. So if Kale goes away and decides, okay, this is what I'm going to work on with Victor, does all this work with me, and then comes back and the accountability pod is like, what? You were supposed to work on X, Y, and Z, not A, B, and C. And she's like, I made a judgment call. I worked on these things, and I hope it's not too egregious that we're now 10 days behind schedule.
Right.
And again, it comes back to that coordinator role. Okay, I'm planning the schedule. What's realistic? How can I account for all the delays that are going to inevitably happen?
Yeah.
How can I help my liaison set reasonable expectations with the reporter so they can not be unreasonably disappointed by the process? Because to some extent, I think the processes that aren't disappointing are the unicorns. I think especially when you've been traumatized by any situation, it is, for me personally, tremendously disappointing that I'm in the situation I'm in and that I'm unfairly tasked with my own healing. The notion that someone can't undo what they did is egregious in my mind. I loathe that, and yet it's the reality that I live in.
It's what exists, and it is. It's like, I wish there was a way to say, voila, it's gone. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, or even help the person who inadvertently led to my suffering. Just understand, not even in experience it, but just understand the depths that I've sunk to, and like how it impacts mental illness I'm struggling with if I'm depressed or experiencing a lot of anxiety at that time in my life.
Yeah.
But it is what it is, and it's like, how do you help people set healthy expectations that are not going to lead to just this huge nuclear meltdown when they get to the other side of the process? It's been a year and they think, okay, this person is now, and again, this depends on consequences and it depends on what your process does, but now this person's, say, re-entering your community, or is finally eligible to begin teaching community workshops with a disclaimer, or however you have framed your accountability process.
Right.
They've gotten to that place of re-entering participation or leadership or teaching or whatever it looks like. How are you going to sort of avoid a complete nuclear meltdown? Like, how do you set those expectations so that they understand it's not going to be perfect and the person may not be totally rehabilitated, but we're hoping to make them less harmful, help healing, get access to resources, help you feel seen. Mm-hmm. One amazing process from the Restore process, all in capital letters, by Dr. Cole, Mary Cole, Koll. She published a paper which I have not looked at yet because it's behind a paywall, but I have friends in academia that are going to help me get access to those papers. She describes a 1-year process where part of that rehabilitation is sitting and listening to all the primary trauma, as well as all the secondary trauma of all the support workers, talk about how this incident has impacted them personally and the consequences that they've seen, and just having the person that was at the center of the spokes of this wheel of suffering, essentially, just hear and acknowledge what's happened. Just that, not even a punitive process, just an awareness process.
Yeah.
And that's part of her academic approach to restorative justice.
Wow. Yeah, I think I really love the awareness. I think is really useful, and I guess one of my challenges, and this is mine, I'm not putting this on you, and maybe we should come back for another video on this because we're running long. So I have more questions, and if you have questions or comments, please leave them below, and maybe Victor will answer them for us. If you'd like to support his work, please go to patreon.com/Victor Salmon, and we'll talk to you soon.
Bye.